is becoming that point of the season where the table is really taking shape. And I've got to ask the question, really. I guess the answer to this depends on who you support, but what kind of season has the Premier League been so far, do you think? How do fans feel? I'd love to hear your comments as well to this video too. What do you think of the Premier League's competitiveness at the top and at the bottom? And has it been a pretty dull Premier League season, a pretty predictable one, or have you found it quite exciting and interesting? Love to hear your thoughts, but obviously I'm here with Myles today. We'll have very different perspectives on how the Premier League's gone for our respective teams, won't we? And I think as a United fan, I can't wait for it to end, to be fair. But there are so many elements of this season, I think, that have been really fascinating and really interesting and almost like unprecedented, really. And the same goes for being a Villa fan. I guess you found that too, right?
Yeah, it's been such an interesting season to watch, and it feels like I could do with it going on a little bit longer, to be honest, because we've hit form right towards the end of it. So, yeah, I think with any season, you're looking for the major conversation points. Is there a battle for relegation? Is there a battle for the title? Who's going to claim the top four? What are the domestic cups looking like? And we've probably had the best conversation around the top four that we've had in years, the best conversation around the domestic cups that we've had for years. But the other two, the two biggest, you would say, meh. Like, that's the best way to put it, isn't it?
Well, it sounds like the league is harder to win and easier to stay in based on that logic. So it's a bit of a closed shop, I think, for a lot of clubs that are trying to, get a foothold in the Premier League. And that's kind of disappointing. And that's where the kind of question comes about, really, as to whether this is a competitive league. Yeah, the tier of quality at the very top has declined to a degree where they can win the title at a canter. And I think that's disappointing for Premier League fans, for English fans, and for just anyone that wants a competitive league. Because yes, it has been exciting below that, but they're fighting for scraps, really. They're fighting for crumbs. Qualification for a European competition is not a trophy. And you want to see clubs wanting to and have the resources to get to that upper level. I think Arsenal have that and will look back at this season with regret, I think, definitely, because they've had injuries and we know that, and they've had a bit of bad luck, but they could have been that team that competed. They've got the quality to do it. So it is disappointing for me from that perspective.
But you could end up with a top four of Liverpool winning their first Premier League title in front of full stadiums ever. That's a massive achievement. Arsenal second, yes, they could win the Champions League for the first time.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, this season is the best season in their history, maybe, or at least since the Invincibles. You could end up with Newcastle, who have won a domestic trophy and got back into the Champions League. They will take that. You can end up with Villa, who could also win a domestic trophy, get back into the Champions League. And all of a sudden, all right, there wasn't a title race, but the top four are incredibly happy with the season they've had. Now, there'll be teams that won't be happy with that, obviously. The likes of Man City are never going to be happy. One of Man United or Spurs is inevitably going to have had the worst season ever. And we've been used to them being part of the top six conversation. But again, one of them could end up with Champions League qualification and a trophy this season. So that in itself tells you that this season is such a hard one to judge. Yes, we expect two teams to at least be battling it out, but maybe that's because we've had that recently. We've had City and Arsenal the last couple of years. We had City and Liverpool before that. There have been years, and you know this as a Man United fan, been years where Man United have run away with it, really. We've seen that in the Premier League before, so I don't think it writes this season off when that level just below has provided competition, and the cup competitions have been so interesting. Like, we could end up with 3 English European Cup winners this season. And then we could also end up with 2 new domestic cup winners.
The permutations as well for European qualification could extend far down the table, like Bournemouth or like 9th place could qualify for the Conference League, that's incredible. And you're right, it is unprecedented. As to whether this season's kind of a transitional one for Premier League clubs and whether next season might promise to be more competitive at the top especially. And I say that with a view to clubs like Villa and Newcastle clearly growing in strength, but also having that ghost of PSR looming over them and keeping their finances in check from being too competitive and expending beyond their means, really. Is that going to be an issue, do you think? As a Villa fan, Myles, do you want to step up to the next level, and at what cost do you do that next season?
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that kind of likes it being a challenge rather than it just being who can throw the most money at it. Obviously, no fan wants a repeat of Chelsea or Manchester City buying league dominance. Like, we don't want to see that. And when you have the financial powerhouses behind the likes of Newcastle, Chelsea, and even Villa, to be honest, that is very foreseeable if you take those PSR regulations out. However, you can see the system's not fit for purpose, because what it's inevitably doing is damaging academies, it's changing the valuations of players, and it's creating this world where, yes, you build something naturally, and you still have to ship it on. I mean, you saw us last season. We had to sell Douglas Luiz when we really didn't want to. We've done really well at kind of regenerating that and doing well. And we've made some good player sales with the likes of Diaby and Duran going to Saudi. That's great. It wouldn't surprise me if we had to shift at least one major asset in the summer, particularly if we don't qualify for Champions League. Newcastle may be forced into selling Isak if they want to improve the rest of the squad. That's a conversation for them to have internally. You can't do everything. And I think really the people that it's hitting the most is right down the bottom. Because look, Forest had this trouble where when they got promoted, they breached PSR, had the points deduction, it was messy, and it nearly cost them really dearly. And if it had, they wouldn't be where they are now. If you're a new club coming up, what chance do you have if you can't take that big pot of money and go for it?
Well, that's the question about the competitiveness of the Championship compared to the Premier League, and it is purely fueled by the survival of the richest, basically, isn't it? But again, I suppose you could get by with smart investment. But for a club like Ipswich have kind of committed a lot of money to financial investment in players this summer, and they've still got half a squad that's kind of from League One, from the Championship. And they've struggled, and they've done the best out of the promoted teams, but they conceivably could have under 30 points and get relegated. So you could get just above 30 points and avoid relegation this season. And it used to be that magic 40-point mark, didn't it? And that's so not the case anymore, because even the most mediocre of teams above the relegation zone, I include United in that this season, can kind of canter their way to safety and have literally no jeopardy as well. And we've just seen, haven't we, that Burnley and Leeds are promoted now from the Championship, so they'll be back in the Premier League. And this yo-yo continues of clubs going between the two divisions. And there might be a team from the Championship playoffs that will break that, and it'll be like a Coventry or something coming up for the first time in a while. But how will they fare? It's all financially driven, and that's the challenge, isn't it, that PSR kind of puts on clubs like that. How do they break through and become kind of a lower mid-table team and become relatively consolidated?
Yeah, it's hard because you can see clubs trying to do it slowly in a way. And like Ipswich, I think they've done that this season where they have gone out and spent money. But if you look at what they've spent money on, it's like players that will be excellent in the Championship, not good in the Premier League necessarily. With the exception of probably Delap, that was the sign-in, and Hutchinson could definitely remain in the Premier League and wouldn't look out of place. But the majority of their squad is built for them to go again next season. And for them, that makes sense, really, because they can hold on to McKenna. They can build that squad stronger to return to the Premier League with a better foundation. Because you're right, there are still League One level players there. They can't make that jump that quickly. But it's sad that you almost have to become a yo-yo club for a while to make it financially viable for you to compete. Second year in a row, all three promoted teams have gone straight back down. That's not something that bodes well for the competitive nature of the league. And does PSR really stop that? I mean, look at Leicester.
Yeah.
Leicester are a big club these days with a really proud recent modern history that should have thrived on the opportunity of being back in the Premier League. They bring a new manager in, and look at the January window as a perfect example of being hamstrung and not being able to actually do anything to compete. But again, I do go back to, I would rather that than them put themselves in financial jeopardy, because we've also seen the opposite side, I guess.
Don't you think there's
got to be a balance?
Don't you think there's an incentive there to sometimes maybe skirt the rules like Forest did to a degree and throw enough money at enough players that something's going to stick, and you'll have a Murillo in there that's going to be worth a fortune further down the line, and take the points hit knowing that you might have a few players that potentially could get you up to that part of the table? Maybe,
but it's risky. Forest barely survived when they had their points deduction, and I think you look at them and Everton when it all went on with them, that was a horrible time for the fans as well, because there was so much uncertainty. I remember us talking about not knowing who the relegated teams were even after the last kick of the ball of the season, because it felt like other deductions were looming. So I don't think you ever want to kind of play that level of chance.
Well, that's, I think, why Champions League qualification is so important, isn't it? But then it's also a case in that part of the table, and Villa included in that it's the biggest squad that gets the furthest and does the best. Like, it gets to the second half of any season, injuries start piling up, and the effect of injuries on players has become fatal to some clubs. Their form is completely disrupted by the fact they've lost two or three at least, key players, and not had a squad deep enough to kind of rotate them. So that worries me, I think, for competition at the top end of the league, and teams like Villa and Newcastle sustaining that, because you want to see them competing for the title eventually. And any club with ambition wants to make that next step. But how much money do you need to do that?
Well, if we hadn't sold Duran in January and Diego Carlos, where would we be now? Because we've improved our squad and increased the depth, but we had to make sales to do it. Villa wouldn't really have wanted to sell John Duran, if we're honest. He's one of the brightest prospects in world football at the time that we sold him. But equally, it has meant that we've given the Champions League a really good go, got to a domestic semi-final, and are now competing for the top four again because we were able to bring depth in to replace him. So there is always that kind of juggling act. And we've seen it with clubs before. I mean, you look at Brighton, Leicester, every time that they felt like they were on the edge of something and getting ready to compete, their prize assets are picked off because they have to go and then invest the money in other areas to compete at a top level.